All right, let's look at Judges chapter 4. We're going to cover Judges 4 and 5 tonight. Judges 4, we're going to start talking about the lone female judge, Deborah. How many judges were there? 15, okay. About how long of a period does the book of Judges cover? I'm not sure we've talked about that in class yet. Maybe we did. Okay, 350 to 400 years, thereabouts. If you look in Acts 13, the Apostle Paul says in his sermon there 450 years, but there's some textual questions about that. So just going by the years given in the book of Judges, they were oppressed for this many years, they had peace for this many years. You add all that up, it's somewhere around 400. But then we mentioned Shamgar, the third judge. There's no chronology given with him. There's no dates or numbers or anything. Maybe there was some overlap with Ehud. There's even some indication that Shamgar, maybe there was a little bit of overlap with Deborah. You see that in chapter 5, right around verse 6. So we're just going to say 350 to 400, give or take. Okay. Now, chapter 4, verse 1, Israel again did evil in the sight of the Lord. That word again, okay, I know we've said this several times, and I'm going to say it again because it's one of those indication words that tells us, oh, rinse and repeat. We're starting this cycle over once again, okay? So, as disciplinary punishment, verse 2 of chapter 4, the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. And the commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim. Okay, Jabin is the king of the Canaanites, some clans that have come together, and he is ruling over them. But the leader of his army is a man named Sisera. Now, this is a different King Jabin that you read about in Joshua chapter 11. So you might be thinking, Jabin, I've seen that name before. You have, but it's a different Jabin. We're about 100 years later at this point, so it's a different person. Now, I want you to note these locations. If you look here on the slide, you see Hazor, which is right here. All these locations listed down here, they're all inside this black circle. Hazor is up here. Naphtali, that's this white tribal region here belonging to one of the 12 tribes. Zebulun, the yellow here, another one of the 12 tribes. Now, what's not on this map is Mount Tabor, which is right about there, okay? Just there on the northern border of Issachar. And then over here is the Kishon or the Kishon River. All of these locations factor into the story and play an important role in the story in Judges chapter 4. If you have your book with you, again, you don't have to have it, but if you do, I think on page 81, there's a map there that you could refer to that has all of these places. Mount Tabor, here's a picture of it. Comes up a lot in this story. So this mountain is going to serve as really the battleground location for the battle that takes place in chapter 4. At the summit of Mount Tabor is a city that bears the same name, and you can see that in Joshua 19 and verse 22. And this city, you would imagine this would be a good place to have a city, right? It's on the top of a mountain, and this was a walled, fortified city. This would be a very impenetrable type of city, and it lasted even until the time of Josephus, who was a Jewish historian in the 1st century AD. So we're still 1,300 years or so until we get into the time of Josephus. So this city stood for a long, long time. 1,800 feet high in the land of Issachar, and it overlooks the valley of Jezreel. And you see this Kishon River. Well, let me talk a little bit about this picture here. Here's Mount Tabor over here in the distance. I know you can't see the mountain itself, but you can see the name Mount Tabor there, Mount Moreh, Mount Gilboa. Now, down here in this valley, this Jezreel Valley, the Kishon River flows right here. Okay, and it kind of meanders its way back through there. This picture is taken standing on Mount Carmel and looking to the east. All right, so this is the region that we're talking about. All of these places here. Here's Mount Carmel over here near the Mediterranean. Mount Tabor is over here. The Kishon River flows here in the Jezreel Valley, and so you can see from Mount Tabor the Kishon River. Now, I don't really care much for going through geography in Bible classes, but these places are helpful to know as we make our way through the story in Judges chapter 4. Just another shot of Mount Tabor, a little bit closer shot. Jesus would have walked by this mountain many, many times. He would have seen this location many times. And again, important place in the story in Judges 4. Okay, good. No more pictures and maps. All right. Judges 4, verse 3. The sons of Israel cried out to the Lord, for Jabin and Sisera had 900 iron chariots, and he oppressed the sons of Israel severely for 20 years. We're introduced to Deborah in verse 4. She's sitting under the palm tree that becomes known as the palm tree of Deborah, because that's where she would render judgment to the people. Now, we read through the first 5 verses on Sunday, so I just wanted to quickly go through those. And now, beginning at verse 6, we're going to work our way through the text. She sent and summoned Barak from Kadesh Naphtali and said to him, Behold, the Lord, the God of Israel, has commanded, Go and march to Mount Tabor, and take with you 10,000 men from the sons of Naphtali and from the sons of Zebulun. Okay, I'm going to go back a couple of slides, back to the map. Who are the 2 tribes that the Lord tells Barak to pull soldiers from? Who are they? Naphtali and Zebulun. Okay, these 2 tribes, they are right here in this area where all of these locations that we've been talking about tonight, Mount Tabor and the river, these are places that are very much, the tribes are very much involved with these locations. Okay, so Barak is to take soldiers from Zebulun and from Naphtali. Now it says in verse 6 that Barak is from Kadesh Naphtali. Now that's not on this map, but that's over in this area, right over here. Now, verse 7, I will draw out to you Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his many troops, to the river Kishon, and I will give him into your hand. So Barak is given this charge from the Lord through Deborah. Go summon these troops, 10,000 of them. Go to Mount Tabor. Sisera is going to come out, and there's going to be a battle. And you need to go and do this promptly. Now, what is Barak's response in verse 8? I need you to go with me. Okay? So, Barak is reluctant to go into battle without Deborah at his side. There's all kinds of speculations as to why that is. Ultimately, we don't really know the answer. The scripture doesn't tell us why he was hesitant to go into battle. But it says, I'm not going unless you go with me. So she says in verse 9, I will go with you. Nevertheless, the honor shall not be yours on the journey you are about to take, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hands of a woman. And then Deborah arose and went with Barak to Kadesh. The honor will not be yours. Who instead is going to get the honor, according to Deborah in verse 9? Well, yeah, in Jael, eventually, we know that later in the story, but she just says a woman is going to be given the honor for this victory. Now, ultimately, the chapter is very clear. The Lord is the one who brings about the victory, but a woman is going to receive the glory and the honor for this. Now, we don't have to speculate about this. What's unusual about that? A woman receiving the honor for a military battle. What's unusual about that? This is not a trick question, by the way. Women don't go into battle, okay? Women don't fight wars. They don't fight in the military. Now, we know later what happens with Jael, that's not even a victory that happens on the battlefield, okay? We'll talk about that momentarily. But in the arena of men, war, battle, women are not supposed to be the ones who get the honor and the glory. And Barak knows this. And so when Deborah says this, I don't know if it bothered him. I don't know what his feelings were about it. He probably didn't care very much. He said, I don't even want to go fight unless you go with me. So maybe he just didn't feel that he was capable. Deborah is clearly someone who is respected. People are coming to her for judgment. He wants her on his team. I can understand that, right? She's a prophetess, the text says. So I can understand why Barak wants her on his team, okay? Now, in verse 10, the 10,000 men from Zebulun and Naphtali are summoned, and Deborah goes with Barak. Now, in verse 11, we're given this. The story of Deborah and Barak pauses briefly to tell us about a man by the name of Heber the Kenite. Now, this man is mentioned here in verse 11 because it is setting up what's going to be discussed later in the chapter. He's inserted right here, but it's setting up what happens beginning in verse 17. So this man, Heber, I don't know, I don't care how you say it. If you have a comment or question about him, say it however you want. This man is a Kenite. Now, you got to go back to chapter 1 in order to see that name before. Chapter 1 and verse 16. Who were these people? What's going on here? So go look at chapter 1. The descendants of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law. Now, who was that? Moses' father-in-law. What was his name? Say it. Jethro. Jethro. He also went by another name. Bonus points if you know this one. Starts with an R. Yep. Who said that? Why? Don't be ashamed. Say it. What was it? Reuel. Okay, Reuel, Jethro. This is Moses' father-in-law. He is referred to as a Kenite. A Kenite is kind of a clan or a tribe that was a branch off of the Midianite people. Okay? Now, what happened is when the Israelites were coming out of the land of Egypt, Moses obviously has the interaction with his father-in-law. You remember when his father-in-law Jethro said, it's too much for you to judge all the people. You need to pick 70 people who can judge the smaller cases. And okay, Jethro was a Midianite. Moses marries this Midianite woman, Zipporah, and they are a part of this Kenite tribe or clan. Now, during the Exodus and the wandering in the wilderness, you can read about some interactions between the Israelites and the Kenites in the book of Numbers. And this clan, once the Israelites made it into the land of Canaan under Joshua, these clans then separated. They apparently had nothing to do with each other anymore because there was no need for that. So when the Israelites go their way, the Kenites go their way, and their way was south, down in the Negev area. They went way south, okay? Except one of them who did not go with everybody else, Heber the Kenite. All the other Kenites went south into the Negev. Heber went north. He separated from the group. And that's why in chapter 4 of Judges in verse 11, it says Heber the Kenite had separated himself from the Kenites. They all went south, but he set out on his own and he went to the north. Now, he's introduced here, again, setting up what happens in verse 17. But he sets up his tent as far away as Zananim, which is near Kadesh. Now, where are Deborah and Barak and the 10,000 soldiers? According to verse 9? Yeah, they're in Kadesh. Okay, so they're near where Heber the Kenite is. Now, we'll come back to him a little bit later in the story. Sisera, the commander of the Canaanite army, is informed that at Mount Tabor, that in Kadesh, that is where Barak and 10,000 soldiers are. So he's informed of this, and now it is time to go into battle. Verse 13, Sisera called together all his chariots, 900 iron chariots, and they set out from Harosheth Hagoyim to the river Kishon. Deborah said to Barak, "Arise, for this is the day in which the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Behold, the Lord has gone out before you." Okay, who is Deborah attributing the pending victory to? The Lord is going with you into battle. God is fighting with you. But you still got to go and lead the army. You still got to go and fight the battle. So Barak went down from Mount Tabor with 10,000 men following him. And the Lord, verse 15, routed Sisera and all his chariots and all his army with the edge of the sword before Barak. And Sisera alighted from his chariot and fled away on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and the army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and all the army of Sisera fell by the edge of the sword. Not even one was left. Okay, now let me see if I have, and I don't. I thought maybe I had another map up here, but I don't. All right, so let me go back. I'm going to go back a few slides. I want to show you something that's really important, that if you don't take a little time to look at the geography, you would miss this, okay? All right, so right here, this is where they're fighting, okay? And when, let's see, where's the bigger map? I went the wrong way. Sorry, I need to go back one more. Two more. How about three? Man, there we go. Okay, all right. Here's what I want you to notice. So they are fighting in this area of Mount Tabor, right down here. When Sisera's army begins to flee, it says in verse 16, that they went as far as Harosheth Hagoyim. Now that's not up here, but it's over this way. It's to the west of Mount Tabor. So the Canaanite army, they flee to the west. Okay? Now let's keep reading. Look at verse 17. Sisera fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, the man that was mentioned in verse 11. But do you remember where he is? He's in Kadesh. So they're fighting down here. The army of the Canaanites flees to the west, but not Sisera. He flees to the north. He runs completely away from his army. Now see, you wouldn't have caught that if we didn't take some time to look at the map and find all these places. Strong, brave king Sisera is, right? Or commander, not the king. Jabin's the king. Sisera flees in the opposite direction. And he goes to the house of his buddy, Heber the Kenite, because there's peace between them. But what Sisera doesn't know is there's a woman that lives in that house too, Jael, the wife of Heber. And she goes out in verse 18 to meet Sisera, and she says, "Turn aside, my master, turn aside to me, do not be afraid." And she invites him into their tent, into their home. She gives him hospitality. He asks in verse 19 for some water to drink, but she says, "I'll do you one better." She gave him some milk. If she was a really good host, she would have given him coffee. He asked for water. She gave him milk. She's really taking care of him. It says that she let him lie down and she put a blanket over him. She is taking care of him. And it looks like she's on his side. So in verse 21, Jael, Heber's wife, took a tent peg and seized a hammer in her hand and went secretly to Sisera and drove the peg into his temple. And it went through into the ground, for he was sound asleep and exhausted. So a nice glass of warm milk, tucked him into a nice comfy bed, and then she takes a stake that you would hold a tent into the ground with, and she drives it through his head. Wow. Jael is no friend to the Canaanite army. Now, verse 22, Barak was pursuing Sisera. He was chasing after him, and Jael came out to meet him, and she said, "Hey, let me show you what I've done." He goes in, he sees Sisera lying dead with a tent peg in his temple, and Barak never messed with Jael again. Wait, does your Bible not say that? All right. Verse 23, the Lord is given credit for the victory over Jabin, the king of Israel. And the hand, verse 24, of the sons of Israel pressed heavier and heavier upon Jabin, the king of Canaan, until they destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. Okay. So there are two women who are highlighted in this story, Deborah and Jael. And through their courage and through their actions, the Israelites are delivered. Talked about that's what the word judge means, the deliverance of the people. They deliver them, but the glory, the honor of the victory ultimately goes to God, but it goes to Jael and to even Deborah. Now we're going to go into chapter 5 and look at some things in this chapter, but let me stop and just see if you have questions or comments about the story. Okay. I take it she and her husband disagreed. You're right. I'm not certain. I'm not sure. What exactly led to this disagreement between them and her having the actions or the courage to do the actions that she did? I'm not certain what all led up to that, but they clearly had a disagreement over where their loyalties should be. Yeah. Yeah. Well, deception, of course, right? Where was her husband? I don't know. Maybe with all the battles and things going on, he's out and, a part of that somehow. I really don't know. But yes, it's something I did think about, but I don't really have anything to answer. But my dad does. So.
She took to heart what God told him to do. He said, kill them all, every one of them.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and maybe that's the simple reason. Yeah. Good. Yes.
In verse 8, was Barak, he wouldn't go into war without Deborah.
Mm-hmm.
Was there a lack of faith in God, or this one person?
Yeah, I really don't know. The question was, why doesn't Barak want to go into battle without Deborah? Why is he unwilling to do that? Maybe it is a lack of faith on his part. I do think there is something to what I said before about, Deborah is clearly on the Lord's side, and so he wants her to be on his side. So what other things, though, might have contributed to that, I don't know. I do wonder if there's this element involved, and I'm not certain about it, and that's why I didn't go to it earlier. Where are the men in this story? Like, where are, all the other judges are male. Where are the strong, faithful men in the story? There's not any, right? We're told who Deborah's husband is, but nothing is said about him other than he's her husband. Why is the situation such in Israel that There's no strong, faithful men who can do this, right? And maybe that's just speculation, I suppose. But there are some things in chapter 5 as well that make me wonder if we're not dealing with a situation where there is a lack of faith on behalf of many people. Alan?
Just as Israel wanted to take the ark into battle so that God would be present.
Yeah, right.
Ark,
Okay.
Deborah,
Good idea.
as the judge, is designated by God. If she comes with me, then I know God is with me and we will win.
Okay.
It's sort of I hate to use the word talisman, but it's almost like, this is my good luck.
No, that's a good word,
If you
yeah.
come with me, then I will succeed.
That's a good word for it. I do think there is something, though, to Deborah saying, you need to know that the honor is going to be given to a woman. And that's a shameful thing in that time. You know, men fight battles, not women. And this is a shameful thing. And I do think she's kind of saying that to Barak to kind of say, this is not the way it's supposed to be, right? Now, that doesn't mean that, please don't hear me saying that, women can't be strong people of faith or anything like that. Clearly, that's not the case. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to war, that is not the place for women. Okay? Historically, that has always been true. This is not the place for women to show off their valor and their courage.
And men would not have wanted to be killed.
Yes, yeah, that's right. That's right.
Shameful to them that a woman.
Yeah, that's right.
It may be going back.
Okay, now the comments are starting to come out. I knew that was a hornet's nest. I should not have prodded. Okay, yes, Phil.
You see a breakdown in the priestly role. They're not teaching the law anymore, so people are drifting away.
Yeah, presumably, right? And that goes back to something Wayne brought up a Sunday or so, a week ago or something like that, about the breakdown of the teaching that ought to be done in the nation. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, just talking about the spiraling aspect of the narrative is that just continuing from here, we're going to see Israelite society evolve even further. We're going to see, near the end of the whole book, is you have
Yeah, it's terrible.
priests doing not
Yeah, absolutely. So Thane was mentioning the spiral that we've mentioned, that it's not just a cycle of sin, but a spiraling downwards and things get worse and worse. That's exactly right. Okay, let's go to chapter 5. There's a lot of things in chapter 5 that I think are just fascinating details, things that we are very easy to just skip over because, it's just one of those songs of praise that's, put together after a great victory and it's poetry, so we kind of rush through it, okay? But we make a mistake when we do that. So, verse 1, Deborah and Barak sang on that day, saying. Now, there are things, if you read this, there are things that are said from the first person perspective. I did this. Then there are other things that are said from the third person perspective. And I'm not sure what to make of that, if anything, really, but you might notice that as we read through. Chapter 1, verse 2, that the leaders led in Israel, that the people volunteered, bless the Lord. Okay, there were soldiers in the Israelite tribes who came out to fight against the Canaanites, and praise God that they did. All right, so it starts off with a commendation and a blessing of God. Verse 3, to the Lord, I will sing. I will sing praise to the Lord, the God of Israel. He's the one who gave them deliverance after all, right, as Deborah was very quick to point out. Verses 4 and 5 talk about God's power and His presence and so forth. Now in verse 6, in the days of Shamgar, in the days of Jael, the highways were deserted and travelers went by roundabout ways. What is that? The highways were deserted. If you drove your car out to I-85 tonight and there were no cars on the interstate, what would you think? Yeah. Woo! Yes! We're going to get home on time. Okay. But then after that, you realize I'm the only car on Interstate 85. Then what would you think? Come on, people. Something's wrong. Why am I the only car on the interstate? Why are there no cars on Wade Hampton Boulevard? I am the only one driving on the highway. Why? Okay, remember, the Canaanites are oppressing the people. The Israelites are scared to travel on the main highways through town because the Canaanites are scattered all over the place and they're keeping watch. And so the Israelites have to go in roundabout ways. They have to forsake the highways, but they have to travel maybe in the dark of night, maybe on the dust roads, the dirt roads. I know they were all dirt roads at this time, but stay with my highway illustration. They're having to move about in secret and avoid the detection of the Canaanites. It says at the beginning of verse 7, the peasantry ceased. They ceased in Israel. The peasantry. Who would be the people who would comprise the peasantry? Who would you think in this type of society? The poorest people, but specifically it would be the villagers. Yeah, okay, good. The villagers. And the villagers are oftentimes farmers. This is an agrarian society. Okay? All right, the peasantry ceased. You can't find the villagers until I, Deborah, arose. I arose as a mother in Israel. And she says, new gods were chosen. By whom? The Israelites. Okay? Why are the Canaanites oppressing them in the first place? Because new gods were chosen by Israel. Then war was in the gates. All right, the Canaanites. Now there's battle. This is just talking about chapter 4 and what we've just discussed, the oppression of the Canaanites. Verse 9. My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel, the volunteers among the people. Deborah is thanking the Israelites who fought, but she's also feeling compassion on those who lost their lives as they volunteered to fight. Verse 10, you who ride on white donkeys, who sit on rich carpets, and you who travel on the road. I don't know this for certain, but I wonder if the white donkeys and the rich carpets, is that a reference to the richer people among them? And then those who travel on the road, maybe that's the poorer among them, the ones who are not traveling on rich carpets and white donkeys. I'm not certain about that, but it's a possibility. Verse 12. Awake, awake, Deborah. Awake and sing a song. Arise, Barak. Take away your captives. Then survivors came down to the nobles. The people of the Lord came down to me as warriors. Now, beginning at verse 14, you're going to notice some tribes that are mentioned, locations that are mentioned, who helped in the battle. From Ephraim, those whose root is in Amalek, they came down. The Ephraimites conquered the territory that formerly belonged to the Amalekites. And so I think that's the idea of the root in Amalek. Following you, Benjamin. There's another tribe that came down. From Machir, commanders came down. Machir is a division of the tribe of Manasseh. And from Zebulun, those who wield the staff of office. Verse 15, and the princes of Issachar. All of these tribes that were mentioned in verse 14 and then Issachar in 15, they came and fought with Deborah and Barak. They helped fight against the Canaanites. But, verse 15, middle of the verse, among the divisions of Reuben, there were great resolves of heart. But why did you sit among the sheepfolds to hear the piping for the flocks? Among the divisions of Reuben, there were great searchings of the heart. Gilead remained across the Jordan. And why did Dan stay in his ships? Asher sat at the seashore and remained by its landings. These are the peoples and the tribes who did not come and help the Israelites that were fighting. Asher was too occupied with their activity at the seashore. Dan was staying in their ships. They were too occupied with their merchandise and different things and shipping. The Gileadites, they stayed on the opposite side of the Jordan. They didn't come over to fight. And so all of these who are listed as not helping, these are the ones who are called out in this song. We're going to remember that you didn't come and help. Verse 18 goes back to the two original tribes who sent the 10,000 to Barak. Zebulun was a people who despised their lives even to death, and Naphtali also on the high places of the field. Zebulun and Naphtali's soldiers were willing to die for this, but not Reuben, not those in Gilead, not those in Dan and Asher. Well, they were too busy to be bothered with this. Now the battle ensues in verse 19. The kings came together and fought, and then fought the kings of Canaan at Tanakh, near the waters of Megiddo. The waters of Megiddo. Look at verse 21. It mentions the torrent of the Kishon River that swept away the Canaanites. The ancient torrent, the torrent Kishon. These rivers, the rising waters of the river Kishon stopped the Canaanite chariots. You remember in chapter 4, the Canaanites fled from their chariots and they ran away. They ran to the west. They did that because the waters of the river had risen, maybe because of great rains that had taken place, and the chariots couldn't rush through that swampy, marshy land. My yard looks like that right now. We got like 9 inches of rain this week. I don't know what your yard looks like, but you can't drive a chariot through mud. And so the Canaanites start losing the battle, and they flee from the chariots because the waters of the Kishon have risen to the point that they can't use them anymore. Now, I think this is God. God sent the rain. God made the waters rise. And I say that because if you knowingly send chariots and horses into a river, then you're just not very smart. I mean, surely they know there's a river there, and they can't use their chariots in the river. I think God is helping the Israelites here by making these waters become a torrent of waters and stopping the Canaanites. Yeah, yes, right. Iron chariots are very heavy, and they would have sank down into the mire. All right, verse 23. Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord. Curse its inhabitants. Meroz is a little town along the river Kishon, where the people there, the inhabitants there, could have come out and helped fight. But they didn't. They just let the others take care of that. So the Lord says, curse them twice, because they did not come to the help of the Lord, to help the Lord against the warriors. Now look at the contrast in verse 24. Most blessed, not a curse, most blessed of women is Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite. Most blessed is she of women in the tent. You see that contrast? 2 curses and then 2 blessings. Okay, one last thing I want to point out. Sisera is dead. He's stuck to the ground. And then there's this little ironic insight that's given. Verse 28. Out of the window she looked and lamented. Who did? The mother of Sisera through the lattice. Why does his chariot delay in coming? Why do the hoofbeats of his chariots tarry? Sisera's mother is waiting for him to get home from battle. What's taking him so long? Obviously, she doesn't know what's happened. And so her maiden would say to her in verse 30, oh, they're still fighting. Are they not dividing the spoil? Don't worry. They're just delayed, but they've won. They're just taking their time dividing the spoil. Nope. Your boy's not coming home. He's dead. And victory belongs to the Lord. And there was peace in the land 40 years. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate your time.